The focus of my presentation is really to look at how do we think about, is this okay? I can just take it off. Is this okay? Okay, so I'm really looking at, how do we decide how best to integrate computers in the classroom? And most of my work is primary school classroom, but I think it applies at primary, secondary. A considerable amount of investment has been made in bringing technology to the classroom. And basically what we've found so far is that the majority of the studies have resulted in greater access. Sometimes the students have better digital skills. They can type faster or use the mouse well. But it has not had the impact that they hoped on learning objectives. A couple studies that I can report. One here in Colombia. The authors, Barrera, Osorio, and Linden, looked at computadores para educar. Probably many of you were in schools when this was implemented, this project. And there was a study that was conducted to look at what happened when you put computers in schools. And what they found was that, yes, there were more computers. Yes, there were teachers who were trained to use the computers, but it didn't change learning outcomes. So the question that came out of that is, well, why? How do we make it better? A recent study with PISA, that PISA conducted as part of its data, using its data, was to look at computer use around the world. And once again, what they found was that there wasn't a direct relationship between putting computers in schools and student performance. In fact, one of the things that happened was a little bit of experience. If students reported 1 to 2 hours of using the computer, performance was higher compared to those people who didn't have access to technology. But if they used it a lot more, their performance was worse than people not having technology. So people who used it more than 1 to 2 hours per week, their performance on tests went down. So there are any number of studies that have been done, quantitative studies, and they've looked and they've said, we're not getting improved achievement, improved performance. How do we make, why? We want to know. So before I get much further along, I want you to, just with a partner, talk for a few minutes. What do you think, from your experience, from your background, why is it that the inclusion of the technology hasn't had the impact we've wanted? So take like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and talk with a neighbor. So I want you to keep in mind what you were discussing as the reasons why technology didn't have the impact you wanted, okay? Well, I'm not going to actually discuss it with you right now because we're going to talk about some literature that hopefully helps explain what are the important pieces in what in making technology work. These Aris Ortiz and Cristia are two researchers from the IDB or BEAD, and they have worked to pull together international research and recognizing that the results were not what they hoped. They came up with a model for understanding what happens when we introduce technology. And this is the model that they created. And most of today we're going to spend time on this model. And as we go through some of the pieces of it, I want you to think about what you thought were the reasons that technology hasn't had. Are the reasons you came up with represented in the model? And if not, how does the model need to change? So we'll start with what the model entails. It includes the resources, and they say that basically it's the resources that then dictate the use of technology that then leads to the specific outcomes or impact, whether it's academic or digital or some other kinds of cognitive skills. The authors say it's the resources that dictate the rest of the model. So with infrastructure, they divide that into 3 pieces. One of the pieces of infrastructure is the devices. When I talk about technology, I'm talking about a variety of devices. I'm talking about tablets, PCs, laptops, the introduction of computer-based equipment, devices, dispositivos, and in the classroom. And another piece of infrastructure is connectivity. Are you connected to the web? Is it a standalone computer? Is it connected to a server, a local server, where the only access you have is to what's on the server? The third piece of infrastructure is kind of this combination of space, electricity, security. It's kind of like what in the infrastructure is necessary or important to make the use of the devices functional. So those 3 pieces are the infrastructure. And then there's contenidos. And the contenidos really refers to what's the software that's available on the device, and what are and I would add, although they don't, what's the relationship between the software that's available or the resources that are available in terms of content and the desired outcome. Because we've certainly seen a fair number of studies where they introduced technology and what was available in the software was unrelated. The uno por uno, some of those studies had games and stories on the tablets, and then they looked for academic outcomes, but there was no academic software on the computer. So the contenidos, I think it's really important that that there's alignment between what's available as the resource on the computer and what you're hoping to get out of it. The third piece in resources is human resources, and here they're talking about the teachers, the school directors, the parents, the community, and the students, of course. So, and that's sort of figuring that these are the necessary resources that then impact how computers are used in the classroom. And they then talk about, well, what are the teaching practices, and also what are the school leadership and school management factors that need to be brought together to produce the desired outcome. They have one other piece that is particularly useful as we try to move forward our research on technology. And they distinguish between non-guided use and guided use. So they actually are moving from just access to technology to access plus a more coherent plan for using technology. So the studies, most of the original studies were uso no guiado, non-guided studies, because basically they provided access, but then they said the teacher or the student has to figure out, well, what are the objectives of using it? Or what's the software that should be on it? Or how often should it be used? There wasn't a particular plan ahead of time about how it should be used. They sort of dumped the computers in and said, go for it. The guided use, by contrast, is one that's very important because it continues to discuss access to technology, but the program, it suggests, should define and also provide the resources for the specific objectives, learning objectives or outcome objectives, should have corresponding software and applications to support that, and should also define how frequently the technology should be used. So most of the research to date has been uso no guiado, but currently the big push and the funding through some of certainly the IDB funding is going to be looking for uso guiado. The studies to date to support the model have been suggesting it's empirically supported, but very diverse findings, not always supported. So the argument is we need to look at the elements and see what's necessary to make them better aligned, to make them more efficient. And we need to experiment with the different pieces. And lo and behold, The foundation, this is a particular Guatemalan Foundation, and they have been putting computers in schools since 2004, and they've been trying to change how education happens through the use of technology in the schools. And they collaborated with the ministry and with donors, private business and donors, and with that they've been able to put more than 20,000 computers in schools, whether it's tablets or mostly PCs, in 1,300 schools in Guatemala, and more than 100,000 teachers have been trained through FUNCEPA. The part that I like best from my end is that FUNCEPA is very interested in contributing to international scholarship and also in making better informed decisions. The president is an economist, and so of the foundation, and so he really wants to know how should we make decisions. So you'll notice that there are 3 groups, and the last one, Fordham, is my group. We received a research grant to look at some of these, and that's what I'm reporting today. So initially, FUNCEPA had programs that were non-guided. They had 2 of them. One of them was to provide the opportunity for teachers to buy cheap computers. And so the school would apply, and if they got the approval, the teachers could buy very inexpensive computers, and then there'd be training in how to use the computers. So that was Abriendo Futuro. And then they had, the other program was focused on creating laboratories with 16 PCs in the schools. So the schools would apply, they would show that they had the space and the security, and the idea was that this would provide teachers and students with greater access to technology. Similar to international research, there were positive outcomes like less desertion, more increased rates of passing, and but unfortunately there was no impact on exams, and so on the learning outcomes for students. And these are pretty consistent with what Barrera, Osorio, and Linden found here in Colombia. Okay, so they decided, FUNCEPA decided that they were going to implement a guided program. The guided program has mathematics as the objective, and it's aligned with the curriculum so that they have looked very carefully at the mathematics software so that to try to make sure that the software is aligned with the goals of the ministry for children in primary school. And they've helped the teachers make that alignment. And they use specifically the Khan Academy or the KA Lite, which is a non-internet version of Khan Academy. This is there's a little video that'll tell you about it. And they also define the frequency of use as at least 1 to 2 times per week. Okay. Now, how do I get to it? Can you help me get to the video should be right here. Here we go. Is it going? And there's no noise. And there's no noise. It's not loud. There's no noise.
Let me just...
Sí, con este cable se pone que... ¿Con cuál? Con el cable se pone que es
¿A sonido también?
Se supone, pero...
I'm sorry. This is a brief video that on the versions of the PowerPoint that you'll get will be a link to it. This one is actually on the computer, but I guess we're not getting this right. I can tell you about the program, though. It's a free program that was developed by a person who made a lot of money in the United States in technology, and he decided to, his last name was Khan, and he decided to use a lot of that money to make education free. And so initially, a lot of the programs were in English, but now they've been translated and are used around the world in many, many languages. mathematics is what we use, but they also have some sciences. That
computador.
they have programs where you can learn different science concepts, and they're sort of graded from learning to count in mathematics through calculus and higher level mathematics. They also have
Plataforma en línea donde también puedes acceder sin registro a través del menú Aprende. Una vez que selecciones el tema de tu interés, reproduce los videos cuantas veces necesites y resuelve los ejercicios correspondientes. Acumula puntos y gana medallas por tu desempeño. Mientras más puntos obtengas, tu reconocimiento será mayor. Podrás consultar tus logros y los temas que necesitas practicar más. Solamente establece tu propia meta de aprendizaje e identifica lo que necesitas para lograrlo. Nada podrá detenerte. Si tienes dudas, puedes comentar los videos o participar en foros de discusión. Recuerda que el contacto con tus tutores y compañeros ayudará a tu desempeño académico. No olvides explorar la biblioteca del sitio. Si eres maestro o padre de familia, podrás dar seguimiento a uno o varios usuarios de la plataforma y hasta impartir tus propios cursos, siempre y cuando inicies tu sesión con el botón correspondiente. Únete a un salón de clases global y aprende a tu propio ritmo. ¡Regístrate ya!
Ok. Entonces, esta es una descripción del programa y como usted podía ver es... Oh, I'm supposed to be talking in English. Sorry. So, you could see that it was something that could be used not just for an individual. I saw a program to learn about doing code, and I'm thinking, why haven't I looked at this before? And so it has individual lessons, but it also has some very useful tools for teachers. And getting a little ahead of myself, in Guatemala, the program created accounts for the students. They didn't need to be on Facebook, and they didn't need to be, the accounts were in the local server. So they can be used through the internet, but they can also, you don't need a Facebook account or whatever the other accounts they said in order to register. The particular study that I'm going to describe of this guided use is a study that, it's actually two studies, because initially CeiBA contracted with Manaus, which is an independent evaluation group, and they were initially involved with the impact evaluation of the implementation of this new program. Once it had started, they had collected some baseline data. I became aware of the project, and wrote a research grant to look at the process of implementing the program. Because what we know from the other research we've seen is we get an outcome. The quantitative research often tells us it didn't work, or it did work, but we don't know why. So the research grant that my team at Fordham put together was, can we go talk to teachers as it's being implemented, talk to children as it's being implemented, observe in the classrooms, collect some other kinds of information that can help us understand why it's effective or not effective. So this is the design of the study. And initially the study was intended to, it was all the way the schools, participating schools were selected, they had applied to be part of FUNCEPA's program, and they were randomly assigned to either be internet or no internet, meaning a local server, or to be one of the different conditions, or to be a lab condition with no con, or to not get technology right away, to potentially get it in the future. Well, another reason to have mixed method research is that when they went to implement it, by the time they implemented it, the tablets that they had purchased no longer worked with the online the portal didn't work. And they weren't going to replace all the tablets with a newer tablet. So you can see all of the Khan tablet schools are now in the non-internet. Also, you'll see some other variations. What happened was that in 2 of the schools, all the equipment was stolen, and they didn't refurbish them. They moved one of the 16 PC schools to one of the 13 PC schools. So it no longer was that randomized design. And ultimately, unfortunately, I caught it. Good. No, there's another video though. Yeah, there's another one. Okay. Okay, so plug it in when the time, yeah. Okay, so unfortunately, the realities on the ground, when the equipment was stolen or different things happened, what was left was that the tablet schools tended to be the very, very small schools, and the lab schools were larger schools. So, although in our analyses we control for that, this is a really important variable that affected the research outcomes. Yes, quantitative studies are important, but we add understanding when we add some of the mixed method to our work. And I encourage you to think about that when you design your studies. Okay, so as I mentioned, we had observations in the classrooms, we had interviews, focal groups, there were exams in mathematics that were basically, we had items from the ministry's item base. The decision to look at 3rd and 6th grade is because that's the end of 3rd and 6th grade is when they test children. So we had items that were appropriate for 3rd and 6th grade. So that item bank was used to create the exams. Manaus was pretty much responsible for that part of it. But some of my team was really interested in looking at children's response to using computers. Specifically, how did using computers affect their self-esteem, their self-efficacy, their sense of that I can do math. The Khan approach is a mastery approach. It's an approach that emphasizes children's learning and experiencing success and focusing more on mastery than on competition. So we wanted to look at whether there were changes in children's self-perceptions of their ability to do math. We also wanted to look at teachers' perceptions of their effectiveness as teachers, their effectiveness in teaching math, and their sense of their effectiveness in teaching with technology. There have been some studies recently that talk about these as really important variables in whether teachers use the technology. So we wanted to understand that better. Okay, so let's see. So what did we find? I'm going to jump to the impact, because after we mention the impact, then we're going to come back to, well, why do we think it happened? What made the difference? And that's where the Manaus study, this is why I say it's a Manaus study, literally I got the report a week and a half ago. So it's hot off the press. But and we will be doing more work to look at quantitatively at the results. But basically they reported that when you had technology and Khan, you had better mathematics scores than the students in the no technology by 10 points. And when you had technology without Khan, you had better findings in math. But it was 5 points instead, because it was without Khan, but they had technology. So those are the results that came out of the study, and we're obviously going to be going deeper, looking at effect sizes. But at this point, these are significant after controlling for socioeconomic, after controlling for class size, and a variety of other factors. Okay, so, well, why would we find different findings? What would make a difference? And one of the things the Fordham team looked at is, well, let's you know, what's the difference between having a computer in the classroom and having a computer lab? A lot of the initial studies were computer lab, with the exception of the tablets in some of the, that have been in some of the countries in South America. But labs are very, very popular. You know, what is written here is pretty common sense on some level, but it ends up having an impact. That if you are a teacher and you have to take your class to the lab, you've got to schedule it. If there are 20 classrooms in your school, and you want to get an hour in the classroom with your, in the lab with your class, you think about our school days. How many hours are there in a week that teachers could take a class to the computer lab? Are they all going to get a full hour? Maybe. I mean, a minimum of an hour is really, the literature is very, it says that. So that's an important piece. Whereas if it's in the classroom, there's much more flexible use. There were two classroom models. One of that were implemented. One of them was the tablets, where there was basically one-to-one. There were enough tablets for all the third graders. They were multi-grade classrooms, so oftentimes the students worked in pairs, but there were enough tablets for them to work in pairs, and everybody work on them. Another thing to think about is how does what they're learning on the computer relate to local teaching? Well, if the children go to the lab and do the work, imagine your class of 40, oftentimes the teacher stays back with some of the students, and some of the students go to the lab, so the teacher really doesn't know quite what they're doing in the lab, which makes it particularly difficult to come back to the classroom and make connections. What we saw when we were looking at the tablet situations was the teacher would see that some children were having difficulties with a problem and tell people to stop and go to the blackboard and discuss it again. So there would be more integration between what the children were doing on the when the computer was there. One of the issues being that if you know, when there's a computer lab, you know, teachers who are who have not much experience with technology, one advantage is that the lab, usually there's people who know how to keep the computers running, who run the virus software if they're on the internet. There's some sort of technical assistance provided in a way that if the computer's in the classroom may not be accessible, particularly for teachers who are less technologically have less capacity in that. And similarly, the maintenance, security, there may be differences in those issues related to the lab versus the computer in the classroom. So one of the things we found was that the tablets had of all the different models, the tablets had the most impact on learning outcomes, math outcomes, and in fact it was, again, we don't have effect sizes yet, but there was an 8 controlling for everything. There was an 8-point difference between that and no technology, and it was significantly different from the other technology models as well. That it was used more frequently. We noticed this was the students in their self-reportive use reported using it more frequently because we asked the students, how often do you use the computer in the classroom? So that was statistically significantly more often in the tablet situation than the others. We asked the teachers how often the students used it, significantly more in those classrooms. Not surprising really, but the tablets was more integrated. And an important part was that the tablets didn't leave the classroom. They didn't share them with other classrooms. The lab is shared. So there's less ownership. You know, that somehow when you'd see these kids, they had their tablet. You know, it stayed in the classroom. It didn't go home with them, but they knew their tablet. So there was a certain sense of connectedness, but the reason it's more expensive is because then you need you need them for everybody. A lab can serve all the classrooms, whereas, or many of the classrooms, whereas the tablets would then need to be available in other classrooms. There are some models which we did not test, which would be, the laptops on the cart that goes from one room to another. But that may not be that different from labs because it again has to be scheduled. Okay. So then, you're thinking, labs with 30, now you said sometimes your classes have 40 students, so that's, if I were designing the program, I'd say how many students typically are in the class. They had 30. When they had more students in a class, it was like 32 or 33. Often someone was absent, so when they went to the lab, everybody could go. Maybe somebody worked in pairs, but mostly everybody, it was one-to-one. And it meant the teacher went with the class to the lab, and the teacher has the possibility of providing instructional support to the students in the lab because everybody's there. The 16 computer lab was sometimes everybody would go and they'd work in pairs, which is not as productive in the sense that they could only log in to one Khan account in each pair. So the teacher looking at progress doesn't know which of the children in the pair had the score. So and sometimes the labs weren't big enough for them to go in pairs. And these were the situations where most often children were left unsupervised in the lab, and the teacher was back in the classroom, and there was very little connection between what children were doing with the Khan Academy and what was going on in the classroom. Okay. So I've pretty much just said this. Here's an important part. I mentioned earlier that the PISA study said that when children use the computer more than a couple hours a week, that it was negatively related to achievement. And in fact, in our study, in the Manaus study, that was also the case. Using it more than the once or twice a week for about an hour. In fact, even though it went up significantly when they used it once or twice a week for an hour, in fact 28 points versus no technology. As soon as it went to more than that, it went down. So there's something about too much computer use. I would hypothesize it's related to Facebook and other opportunities, but we'll get to that. Okay, so it does remind me that if we really want to have children have access, there's a lot of research now saying that once or twice a week, at least once a week, for at least, they're saying an hour, but 50 minutes is sort of a minimum for it to have an effect. Anything less than that 50, it takes too long to get to the lab, to get back, to get logged in, it just is actually lost opportunity to teach math. And so there's literature suggesting the importance of the 50-minute or more sessions, and finding enough time for a big school for children in one lab is going to be very difficult. So they may need more than one lab. Okay, the internet. Mixed blessing. We didn't have, the comparison was between internet versus local server. Okay, so it wasn't like you sitting at home on your computer without internet. It was each of the computers in the lab or the tablets were connected to a local server. So the comparison is between the local server and the schools with internet. In the local server, they had a few educational games. They had some resource like dictionary kind of information, and they had the Khan. Whereas, as you know, the internet is like limitless. So when we were watching children, we noticed that as long as they were succeeding with Khan and getting their medals and their points and stuff, they were really into it. But when they were struggling, it was too much of a temptation to go look at chat, to go look at Facebook. And they did it even with us walking around. My students would be walking around and they were off chatting away with their friends. So I would hypothesize that with the tablets, the alternatives were not that exciting. I mean, there were other educational games, for example, and they did sometimes do that. But the importance of making sure children are using Khan in ways that they get success would likely increase their motivation to stay with it and less distraction. We think that internet connectivity is critical, but I think the PISA results and the results of our study suggest that it's also a major distraction. Now, you may have other goals using the internet. You may say that goals of the future, of the next 20 years from now, they need to have these other goals. But we're right now only looking at achievement outcomes and persistence outcomes and so on. So it might change if you had other points. So now I'm going to go to contenidos. So this is just a repeat of that diagram. I'm working my way through. What did we learn about experimenting with this? We learned that the software is what's called computer-assisted software, CAI, and it's considered a supplement to teaching. And when the students get something right, if they get enough right in the set, then the computer adjusts and gives them something a little harder, a little bit more advanced. If they don't get enough right, the computer says, would you like a tip? Would you like to see a video? Would you like to, it sort of gives them more problems at that level. It has the potential to have a class with children with many different levels. In our observations, and this is jumping ahead to pedagogical practices, teachers did not take advantage of that. They started everybody on the same lesson, but some children went further because they were able to be successful and keep going and were really motivated. Some children probably weren't ready for that lesson, became frustrated, and so a real potential of computer-assisted instruction was not realized in what we saw. The videos that it provides are really interesting, and I'm actually going to show you one of the videos. It allowed teachers often said that they learned new ways of teaching something by watching the video. Because the videos are very clearly, they're clear, they're step by step, they show you exactly what to do, and as a consequence, the students and the teachers can benefit from them. Let's see. And as I mentioned, they didn't take advantage of that. We rarely saw the teachers looking at, there are these summary tools where they can see where all the students in their classes, which skills they've mastered, which ones they tried but didn't master, which ones they're struggling. A few of the teachers used that tool, but not many. I believe that part of the reason some of the teachers didn't use it was because they would have to go to the lab, and the lab wasn't always available. It wasn't a computer in the classroom that they could use to access that information. So it's limited use unless it's in the classroom. Okay, so we'll do the next video.
Trabajo todos los sábados en el campo, unas 5 o 6 horas trabajando con asadón, todo. Para ir al café internet y aprender otro poquito más. Esta es mi humilde casa. Aquí es donde estudio, aquí es mi lugar de estudio, solo que está un poco desordenado. Allá es mi cuarto, aquí es la cocina, ahí es el cuarto de mi mamá y ahí abajo están los animales. Yo voy a la escuela desde los 7 años, trabajo, estudio, es mi abuelita María Martina, mi mamá trabaja en el campo y solamente no tengo nada más.
Los guatemaltecos somos habilidosos por naturaleza. Somos pilas, somos chispudos y vivos. Le agarramos la onda a las cosas rápido. Ahora bien, aunque hay personas que tienen una habilidad superior, no a todos se nos presentan estas oportunidades. Josué, de Zumpango, se perfila como el claro ejemplo de esto. Funcepa detectó su innata e inherente habilidad y amor por las matemáticas, creciendo en un lugar con pocas posibilidades alejado de la ciudad, donde las oportunidades son escasas. Él mismo fue labrando su futuro gracias a su facilidad con los números. Su talento y su capacidad son su mayor herramienta para labrar su futuro.
He aprendido bastante, gracias a Dios, me ha ayudado mucho Khan Academy en mi vida diaria porque puedo resolver más rápido mis problemas, puedo distraerme un rato, puedo hacer lo que me gusta, que es la mate, y puedo descubrir nuevas cosas como crear juegos, ver los videos de cómo se resuelven los problemas de mate. Me ayuda acá también para poder también salir adelante en la mate, que me gusta bastante, que esforzando todo se puede, descubriendo, siendo como Jorge el Curioso.
Un video muy especial, ¿verdad? Él, he's somebody who, yeah, I know, it's a problem. So they discovered, the way they discovered him was that he had all these points. They, I had access to, the Khan accounts from different schools for students, as did the program, and they discovered that, what is this kid with all these points? Well, he was working in the weekends to get the money to go to the internet cafe so that he could keep working.